Hello, welcome back. There are a few more pieces to put on the pad that I didn't get on last time. I know it's been a little while. I've been living with this thing and using it, and it's been pretty awesome. But I just wanted to finish it up and actually make it look all pretty and shiny, and get the last little bit of metal plate on it that needed to go there. So I'm going to do that today. So on the front here, the front of both pads gets a strip of metal that looks like that. Basically just mimics what you see in the arcades. The screw pattern does the same thing. I'm using the same principle as I used for most things here, where basically I will pre-drill one hole, drill all the way in. Drilling through the metal here into wood was kind of interesting. It came with its own unique set of challenges. This one was very stubborn, and the drill bit just did not want to go in. I kept increasing the speed and the pressure, but it still just didn't want to go anywhere. I'm starting to wonder if my drill bits are getting dulled from having used them so much on metal and things here. So that kind of pulled up the sheet metal there because it wasn't really anchored in place properly. And it only went into the wood a tiny little bit. I can bend it back and get it back to the appropriate shape, but that was kind of a little bit disconcerting. I would rather it not have happened exactly like that. So I line the things back up, and now that there's a hole through the metal, I can actually drill through the wood with that. I kind of wish I had had some thicker metal for this. This 26 gauge stuff is pretty thin. So a bunch of sawdust kicked up. I don't want to get that trapped between the metal and the wood, so I have to spend a bunch of time cleaning it out. Pretty much not each time I drill a hole, but before I put in all the screws to attach the thing finally. Anyway, like I was saying, I'm using the same principle here where I'm going to drill the two farthest apart holes first and put screws in them. Then I can drill all the rest. And things will be anchored in place nicely and not do stuff like that, because I need all my holes to line up. So I'm going to hold it flat. I'm kind of trying to run my fingers along it to make sure that I'm actually getting the faraway hole all the way far away from it, if that makes sense. Because I don't want it to ripple in the middle and actually have that closer together than it would be with the metal stretched all the way to its capacity. Some more kind of troublesome drilling here. I skip the part where I have trouble, but yeah, that was another hole that didn't want to go all the way through. Eventually, what I figure out is that I can actually just use that tool to punch all the way through the metal into the wood, and that works a lot better. Like if I actually punch a hole in the metal, then it bends it downward into the wood and actually holds it in place, and also makes the drill bit have an easier time getting in. So that's what I do for all the rest of these holes. The drill bit really catches a lot on the way out, though. That's one of the problems with doing it that way. If it catches too badly, I can just reverse the drill and undrill it out. But I prefer to have the drill moving forward when I'm pulling it out, just so it'll cut the hole a little cleaner on the outside. But sometimes that's not possible. Anyway, clear all sawdust from between metal and wood. It doesn't stick to the metal, only the wood, so I only have to clean off the wood, really. Get that back on, make sure holes are lined up. Make sure it's bent appropriately, so it lays flat. That's another reason I would have liked thicker metal, because this stuff bends all over the place, and even once it's all the way screwed down, it doesn't look completely flat and perfect. It's good enough. Although with thicker metal, I'd have a much harder time working with it and cutting it up for what I need, but it'd be worth it. So as usual, screw in the screws just a little bit, use screwdriver drill bit to drive them in the rest of the way and save myself some head stress. Even so, my right arm has just been sore non-stop, like, over the course of this entire project, just about. Because there's just been so much manual labor that I've had to do, like, way more than I've done at, like, any other period of my life. This is definitely by far the most labor-intensive project that I have ever done. Anyway, so that plate's installed. Feels pretty good, looks pretty good. As good as it's going to get. I didn't bother getting footage for the outer ones of these, but the inner ones were a little more interesting. So these are the side plates. These actually have a gameplay function, kind of, somewhat, because I'll be stepping across them during double mode if I'm going from the player 1 pad to the player 2 pad, or the other way. So these need to be secured really well. Can't have my foot catching on them and like pulling them up as I'm going between pads or something. It was a little bit of a puzzle to figure out how best to mount these as I was doing this. So I didn't have an exact plan for what I was going to do. So I clean out the sawdust, do something very similar to what I did with the front plate. So I've drilled the one hole. Those things are very bendy. Like, they're such thin strips that it's hard to keep them flat and straight. Also, these were cut out of the sheet of aluminum that I bought by accident. So these are not the stainless steel that the rest of the stuff is. So I found out something. Apparently the steel corrodes just as much as the aluminum if sweat gets on it. So I have that to deal with all of the metal on the surface of this. I mean, I'm just going to have to deal with it. I have some metal polish that can kind of deal with the spots if they get like that. But it really stinks, and I don't like to use it. Even if I wear a respirator while I'm applying it, I still have to like leave the room really quick because it smells so bad. I mean, I guess not like stinky smell bad, just like, ew, this is a chemical I don't want in my nose kind of smell bad. Maybe I need different metal polish. Anyway, so yeah, this was unwieldy and in kind of an awkward space there. It would have been slightly easier to do this before I had put the pads together, but I did that long ago and I wasn't going to take them apart just for doing this, so I was just going to do it in place. And I guess having them together was helpful because I needed to make sure those two didn't overlap or anything. I think they actually did. I had to take one out and trim it down a little bit more. I cut out a lot of time spent just taking out metal pieces, retrimming, just taking little bits off of them to shave them down to the appropriate size. Because I wanted to cut them down slowly so I didn't go too far. It's not too hard to take off a piece, it's much harder to add one back on. So those are the 5 holes that anchor the thing down. The screws will not be the only thing holding that down though. So I'm taking those out for some reason. I guess I need to vacuum up the sawdust. And that thing is stuck down with the screw holes. I come up with a better vacuuming methodology later, so there's an actual specific pattern that I follow once I get used to this a little bit for the rest of the metal pieces. So I put all the holes through the one thing. I'm thinking at this point what I want to do with the other one. Like, I want to use the same... I want to basically align that thing's holes with where the one next to it are, just so that they match up. I had measured these beforehand and marked them with a pencil. You probably couldn't really see the pencil markings, but they were there. So careful with the screwdriver. I just put a big scratch in one of my panels. It's not a big deal, but there's a scratch there now. And I don't think the metal polish is going to be enough to take it out. Oh well. Yeah, so that metal is like, I think it's made for roofing or something. It's not designed for the purpose that I'm using it for here. Arcade pads have this nice, thick, shiny plate metal on them that has a real nice surface to it. I don't know where I would get such a thing. Someday I might redo this with nicer metal on it. Maybe, if I feel inspired and come up with a source of metal. I don't know. But I mean, this stuff works well enough. I think I just need to accept that it's going to look slightly dingy if you look too closely at it. But it's pretty okay. Yeah, it does the job. Alright, got the holes drilled in the other strip. Vacuum sawdust again. Vacuum cleaner gets a lot of action during this. Let's see, can these screws actually go in permanently now? I think they can. Yeah. I didn't want to have them protruding there while I was drilling the holes for the other things so they'd get in the way. Or did I do that? I don't know, I've lost track. So now that I've gotten those in, I noticed that it's really not laying flat there. So that's not good enough. It's kind of bowed upward a little bit. Now that I have the holes drilled, I can't really redo that exactly. But I have another plan. I take out the screws and use this adhesive that I'd been planning to use. I got this specifically for this purpose, for adhering metal to wood. This is the DAP Rapid Fuse stuff. So I just put a big strip of it all along. This stuff sets very quickly. This first application didn't actually exactly take. I had to redo this later, but redoing it was a similar process. I didn't use quite enough this first time, as it turned out, and I needed to prepare the surface a little better. I hadn't sanded it, and it just didn't hold extremely well. And I was kind of racing here to get that in place. I didn't want to misalign its screw holes or anything, but I wasn't sure what the best way was to get it down. So I tried to very quickly get the screws in place a little bit and hope the thing hadn't set all the way yet, and then just hold it down best I can. It kind of semi-worked, but like I said, I had to redo it later. I had to do the same process with this. Oh right, that was still sticking up, so I tried to just stick a little more under there and weight it down. Yeah, I redid it better later. And so far it's held. So screws can go all the way down. Like, the ideal would be if I could just, as soon as I'm done with that, have the thing stuck on there with the screws all the way down within 30 seconds, which is how fast that thing sets, so that I could just weight it down and hold it in place to have it cure the rest of the way. But I can't put in screws that quickly. So I just do it as quick as I can. And hold it down with hands and feet however I can manage. And hope it sets in place. Anyway, so those are attached and adhered, and they feel pretty good. No sharp edges are sticking up. I, of course, worked on these. I work on all the pieces of metal with a file to make sure there are no sharp edges left. So even if I wanted to walk across the thing barefoot, I wouldn't be able to slice my foot open. So the back cover for both of the pads, I've already done player 2. I'm doing player 1 now. These pieces of wood needed to be trimmed down some more because all of the panels had to expand into different dimensions. I made pencil marks there where those need to be cut. So they expanded downward, sort of back toward the bar, and also outward where I moved out my edge finish. So this is the downward expansion being dealt with here. So I have marks of where those need to be cut so that they'll actually fit in place. And I just score with a utility knife to act as a saw guide, and then use a handsaw on them. Didn't want to bother going to somebody with power tools just for these few little cuts. Yeah, it didn't seem worth it. I'm getting used to the handsaw a little bit. It's still a lot of work, but I can at least make the cuts that I want to make with it with enough effort. My problem before was that no matter how much effort I would spend on it, the cut just did not come out the way that I wanted, but finally I got the appropriate saw, appropriate technique, and I can actually do it now. So I gained a useful skill. Clamp in place, get body to the right orientation if possible, which means standing halfway on the table, and saw. For a very, very long time. Plywood is tough stuff, and this is 16 inches of it that I'm cutting through, a little more. That stuff gets in the way a little bit, so I break it off once I saw far enough so that it stops getting in the way of the saw blade. Snap. It kicks up a very satisfying little cloud of sawdust when I do that. Now, one thing the hand saw does is it makes the bottom of that a little bit messy. I guess I don't really show it here, but there's a bunch of little bits of wood hanging off there. I can kind of sort of remove them with my fingers, but I have a solution for that later. That's a little more elegant than what I'm doing there. You'll see that in a bit. So other two pieces get cut the same way. They're a little easier because they're half the width. Still a lot of work though. So at this point, those should fit into place on the where they're going in the back of the pad. At least the front pieces are taken off. Those are the specific ones that were stopping them from fitting. So that made a big pile of sawdust on my floor. I just wanted to show this because it's weirdly satisfying, just the specific way that the vacuum cleaner sucks that stuff up. It's hard to describe, but maybe you can see it on the video. Just something about that, just oddly satisfying. The way it goes just a little bit ahead of where the thing I'm holding is pointed. That little cut on my foot is from catching the pad the wrong way. The bottom of it is pointy enough to cut me if I hit it wrong. I should probably do something about that someday. Alright, so with the front of those trimmed off, laying them in there, they still don't actually quite lay flat. The reason for that, there's one more thing that needs to be done. The reason for that is because of the screws holding the bar in place. They actually intersect with those pieces a little bit. So I have a new tool that I just got recently that can take care of that. This is a Dremel 4000. It probably, the thing that I'm using here probably is not the best bit for this, but it did the job. It's like a sandpaper sort of thing. I'm not very practiced at using this tool yet. Also, you can see that it's kicking up smoke there. So apparently it's getting very hot where it's taking out the bits of the wood. So anyway, the idea is just use this little sandpaper wheel bit thing to take out notches just large enough for the screws and nuts that are holding the bar in place to have a place to sit. Doesn't have to go all the way through, just halfway is enough. I didn't really mark these or anything, I just kind of estimated, then carried them back in, set them in place, saw if they fit. If they didn't, I'd take them back out here and work on them a little more. So I'm not actually sure what would be the appropriate bit to use at this tool. I actually don't know that much about it. I just got it recently. I didn't have to pay anything for it. This was The credit card that I use accumulates points as I spend money on it, and I can order appliances and things like that from using those points. So I figured I'd just order one of these, since it didn't actually cost anything, and see if it could help me with this project, and it did a little bit. But yeah, all I know about this is the few times I've used it for testing, and this is the only real application I've found for it, and a little bit I read in the manual. Unlike a drill, which works with pressure and actually relatively low speed, this works with high speed and very, very light pressure. The idea is just to set it against the surface super gently with the appropriate speed. I can turn this up to higher speeds if I want, but that speed felt about right. And just sort of let it cut in. It kicks up some really fine sawdust as it does its work, which I of course inhale and get all over my face, and it's kind of annoying. So now that those are all cut out, there's one more thing I want to do with this. So those rough edges that the saw left on the bottom, this can very easily and nicely just sand them down super quick. So I decided to go ahead and do it. It's not like those are exposed or anything, I just wanted to do it because it's satisfying. So that's another thing this tool can do, probably a little closer to its intended usage. Alright, so with that last adjustment, these should finally fit in place. Now you might notice that this centerpiece I'm using here doesn't really fit around both posts of the bar at the same time, like that. The recut one that was wider, since I found out my bracket was different from how I expected, that one actually was too tight. I couldn't fit it in place. So instead of cutting another new one, I decided to just use one of the shorter pieces, which is good enough. It's going to be covered up by this metal anyway, so it doesn't matter that it doesn't come quite exactly to the edge of the bar on both sides. So I just accept that the wood, there's a little bit less wood in there than there would otherwise be. So right, those plates of metal go over top of the wood. I like to line them up where the holes are because those are the hardest thing to move around. I would basically have to recut the metal and drill new holes with the hole saw to make those. So I line it up with the holes as best I can and mark out all the pieces that need to come off from the edges, because these are all too large except for the corner piece on the edge you can see on the right from the camera's perspective. That doesn't come all the way to the edge of the edge finish because the edge finish had to move out to accommodate for the arrow panels. Those were overlapping slightly, so I just wanted to pencil mark there. I'll be trimming those pieces off so that they can sit next to each other without overlapping. Then I just kind of have to estimate here about how much I want to take off from the front. I want it to be the same across all three pieces, but I can't see the underside of this to know where it lines up with the wood. So I just say, okay, well that's probably good. Mark out a line using a square. I'll trim that off, and if it needs to be trimmed further, then I can do that. If it's trimmed a little too far, then there'll just be a little bit of a gap. I did not trim this too far, at least not in the first trim. So there were several iterations of trimming doing this that I only just show the first one because it takes so many. So it was protruding out the back just a little bit too, so I wanted to mark that out also for trimming. It ended up being that centerpiece got trimmed on all four sides. So, familiar metal cutting setup. Use shears, follow pencil line best I can. I've gotten better at these too, so I can make pretty straight cuts with them now. Two of those pieces are aluminum and one is stainless steel. They cut slightly differently. You can see how easy and willing the aluminum is to curl over as it cuts. I mean, there's really nothing I can do about it curling over. It's just gonna do it on its own. Steel behaves a little differently. The aluminum feels kind of just a little bit squishier as I cut through it. The steel is more rigid, and it feels more like cutting through a big, thick sheet of paper, but the aluminum is like, it's different. Hard to describe. Definitely noticeably more malleable. Right, other edge of that had to come off because it was protruding out the back a little bit. This one was hard to line up. Just a thin little strip. So this is the one that's made of steel. It sounds a little different, feels a little different, and this is the one that I'm cutting the most. Surprisingly, it's not actually really harder to cut, particularly. It's just different. I guess it does curl around just about as much as the aluminum. But it's more willing to stay flat, I've found. So since all four pieces of that, all four sides of that were cut, all of the corners are very sharp, the sides have little bits of metal sticking out of them, so of course I attack it with a file again, as always. Because I do not want sharp bits of metal anywhere in this project. So to test that it's all smoothed out, I can run my finger all the way along the edge, like that, without anything sticking out at me or cutting me or anything. I had to do this several times because I had to recut that several times. I had to skip it until I was at the point where it all fit the way I wanted it to fit. So I've already attached the Player 2 back plate. This is my process for doing the Player 1 one. It's nothing special, not really anything you haven't seen before. It's pretty much just drill a hole in the corner, put a screw in, drill a hole in the other corner, put a screw in, drill the rest of the holes. Take the screws out, clear sawdust, put the rest of the screws in, and done. Make sure that punches through. So one thing that's a little bit interesting about this is that it's anchoring to two different pieces of wood. So the back cover pieces of wood that we were trimming down earlier, it's going into one of those now. And the screw that holds the metal in is actually the only thing that holds that wood down. So it's going through that into the frame below. But it also screws into the edge finish on the side. So the screws are just a little bit lopsided in what they anchor to, but I don't think it'll be a problem. Opposite corner screws are in. Now I can drill the rest of the holes. You know the drill. Screws come out. Vacuum cleaner cleans everything off. And then it gets mounted permanently. At least until I need to take it off to mess with the bar or something. The screws and nuts holding the bars in place did seem to loosen themselves a little bit over time, so I hope that's not going to continue to be a problem. I tightened them up real good before I put these pieces on, and I'm hoping they'll stay. They're in a really awkward spot where it's hard to get in to tighten them without taking the whole bar off, which is hard to do. So middle piece, exact same process. Takes a bunch of hammering to get that to punch through sometimes. I made very sure that this piece did not overlap the triangle brackets holding the down arrow in place, so that those can still be taken out and put back in freely. So that only comes to the edge of the wood, which actually has a function in holding those forward, so that they won't sort of have any space to slide back. Because the triangle bracket holders are not anchored quite as firmly as they could be. There's only one screw holding them in place, and they can turn a little bit if enough pressure is applied to them, which is a slight problem that I might have to address somehow. I wish I could have had 2 screws holding those in place. So last one, very accelerated. I kept bumping the camera, so that's why the angle kept changing. And there we go. Back cover all mounted. So that is the last piece that needed to go onto these pads. Everything that I had for them is all used. So let's play a song. The video camera that I'm using in the space where this is could not get a wide enough angle to get my entire body into this, so here's just the bottom portion. There's another angle to this that went up on my channel a little bit earlier. So yeah, I've been living with this for a couple of weeks now, and it's great. I'm using it frequently. It's holding up extremely well. I've kind of continued to do sensitivity adjustments and things. It doesn't need too many of them, but I keep finding new ways that I need to change. See, some of it is I have to get used to each individual pad enough to determine which problems are mine and which problems are actually something I need to change with the hardware. I think I have it all worked out now. I'm getting good scores. This was a 98% on this that I got here. So yeah. Project continues to be super awesome. I had a friend over a little while ago, and we both played on it at the same time, and it held up well. He uses the bar, so bars work. I'll use them more for harder stuff once I get used to this a little bit more. There we go. So there's one more video I want to do in this series before the proper conclusion, because like those things are all put together. But there's one more thing I want to cover. I want to give a list of all of my parts suppliers and costs, because I haven't really gotten into that. I have mentioned a few times that this was an extremely expensive project. Like it's pricey. But I'll go over it in detail next time, and I think that'll be the last one of these. So I'll see you then.